talk of a political dirt unit.
Hello, Daniel.
Well, good evening, Brandon. How are you tonight, sir?
Oh, tip-top, mate. Tip-top.
Tip-top. Pretty good.
Yeah, yourself?
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. I'm all right.
It's good. It's nice.
Looking forward to hearing more about this this crazy history that we're talking about.
Oh,
I listened back to that last one. That was a good one, that last one.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's a shame. That. Yeah, I had a big spiel in there about my theories and the case that I made for these guys doing DMT back in the day. That I had to, a whole massive section I had to cut out. I was a bit shattered about that. But,
man.
Sometimes the facts ruin your ruin your hard work.
I was cut for factual reasons, not length reasons.
Yeah, because
Okay.
but I kind of had a thought when I was editing. I was like, hang on a second. Because they're burning acacia wood in the tents, yeah, with Syrian rue, and that was my whole thing. That was the whole thing I was leaning on. I was like, well, obviously they're getting high. But then I started digging into the science, and like you can't get high from burning acacia wood. It has to be like extracted and then vaporized at a much lower temperature. Otherwise, it just combusts and it wouldn't be like active, which just ruined my whole theory. So they cut the whole thing out.
Well, I mean, they can still be getting high on something.
They were, yeah, they were absolutely getting high on something. They were taking,
but not that specific thing.
Yeah, like harmine and datura and like shit that's like no.
Okay. I mean, so it's like the eternal Bill Hicks bit about the mushrooms and the cow shit and the role that played in the human evolution.
Well, it's Terence McKenna, wasn't it?
That's probably what he was riffing off. Yeah.
Yeah, stoned ape theory. Yeah.
That's the one.
Which I'm all. I mean, it makes sense. I think it's probably more likely the bottleneck that we discussed briefly last episode after that supervolcano, Toba supervolcano, when the population was reduced to like 1,000 people.
Yeah.
I think maybe that bottleneck created something to do with like a leap forward in intelligence. Just to guess. Because it seems like before that we didn't have anything, and then after that we sort of emerged from the Ice Age, building cities and shit.
Well, we don't know what we had before that. That's kind of the thing, right? Because it all got bloody blown up in that volcano. Could have had all sorts of civilizations. But we didn't. No,
because
it's too cold.
Well, before the Ice Age, I presume you're talking about. I don't think so, because the ice cores don't show any signs of like anything, like metallurgy or anything like which they do for every civilization. You can see the byproducts of the advanced stuff they were doing and building and stuff in the atmosphere, which gets trapped in the ice cores at the poles.
Okay,
and you can actually see it, and there isn't anything until like the Bronze Age. So I think that ruins that, and also you can like find remnants of like people from that long ago or older, and they've got flint fucking tools and shit. So,
well, look, if you want to get all
this is the thing. This is a thought that I have spent a lot of time thinking about and looking into, and I just don't think that's there.
Yeah, well, if you're going to bring data and ice cores into the conversation, then sure.
Yeah. Also, like you can see in the fossilized seeds the process of domestication. You don't see any of, because once we domesticated them, we changed the seeds from selective breeding, and you don't see it. You only see wild like wheat and shit, up to about 10,000 years ago or whatever.
Yeah. That's always the answer to these ideas of the ancient civilization. It's like, well, we only figured out agriculture. Like, you would need agriculture. We only figured that out, 10, 12,000 years ago. So
exactly.
It just doesn't. It doesn't fit into that time scale. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It seems like, of course, if we were around as same as we are now, like same capacity to do things that we have these days, 100,000 years ago, then of course they would have had some, but we didn't. Something happened. I think it was the volcano and the bottlenecking of the population. I think that did something.
Yeah.
Changed the evolutionary trajectory.
Great grandparents that emerged from that volcano. Like, they were literally the ones who survived that, and everything descends from there. It's just
Let's get stuck into it, though.
all right.
So we're going back to 312 CE. And we're going to go over the triumph of the cross. In October 312 CE, the Roman Emperor Constantine marched his army toward Rome to confront his rival Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. According to the historian Eusebius, Constantine looked up at the sun and observed a massive luminous cross of light suspended in the sky, accompanied by the Greek words, I don't know what that fucking says, but translated in Latin it says, in hoc signo vinces, or vinces, something, which in English means, in this sign thou shalt conquer.
It was just him who saw this, I imagine. Doesn't have any corroborating witnesses.
Well, the historian reckons that's what happened. Eusebius. Whether this was a sign from heaven, a fabricated story, or anomalous aerial phenomena, Constantine used this vision as his military mandate, and he ordered his soldiers to paint the symbol of Christ on their shields. And he defeated Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. Following this, he issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity and completely transforming it from a pacifist philosophy into the armored, state-sanctioned religion of the Roman Empire.
So he had a bit. It sounds like a bit of a Saul on the road to Damascus kind of conversion moment as well, right?
Yeah, it's a common theme. Constantine then directed his architects to construct a central basilica, and he used the location across the Tiber River, known as the Ager Vaticanus, which was the site of the Circus of Nero. At the time was a sprawling, densely populated Roman necropolis filled with the tombs, mausoleums, and altars of the ancient pagans. Constantine ordered his engineers to bury the necropolis. The workers sheared the roofs off the ancient pagan mausoleums, filled the sacred tombs with tons of earth and rubble, and constructed the heavy stone floor of the new basilica directly on top of the dead. The physical headquarters of the new religion was literally built on the crushed, buried remains of the old pagan world. So when they say, like, the Vatican is built on the body, on the corpses of thousands of pagans, that is true. Yes.
Yeah. I've been there. I've been to the catacombs of Rome.
Have you? Cool.
Yeah, not the catacombs. I've been to the Vatican as well, but I haven't been to the catacombs under the Vatican. But yeah, I went to the catacombs under Rome. It's fucking freaky, man. It's literally just these miles and miles of all of these fucking bones. It's insane.
Yeah,
so it's almost like I remember the memory of it rather than the actual thing. It's like it's bizarre. But
Did you go to the Vatican Museum?
Probably.
Sounds cool. So they formalized the ideology of this conquest over the pagans in the Vatican Museum. So the layout of the Vatican Museum today forces visitors to walk through endless corridors displaying the accumulated statues, artifacts, and mythology of the old pagan world. And it's like a progression which turns more and more Christian. And then when you get to the Hall of Constantine, right at the end, painted on the ceiling of the room, is a massive fresco called the Triumph of Christianity it's like the interior of a classic stone temple. And on the floor is a smashed pagan statue. And directly above it is a big golden crucifix on a pedestal.
That's my least favorite part of the Bible is the crushing the other religions.
The conquest.
Bits.
Yes. Yeah, and that and this could be such a beautiful story if it wasn't for the conquest bit.
Yeah.
If it wasn't like the bloodlust, then this would be a great like story of like the triumph of like knowledge but
that's also, I mean, that's an important part of why it's succeeded, right? Because that's in its genetic architecture. It comes from that the Jewish, Moses, Joshua, whole thing. And Jesus tried. I mean, sorry, look, we didn't do our whole Bible episodes yet, but so maybe we won't spoil that. But yeah,
Don't ruin that book. No one's heard those.
Our take on it.
So we spoke last time about the Corpus Hermetica, or the Hermetic text.
Yes.
And so in Alexandria, Egypt, where they were written in the first few centuries of the Common Era, so around this time, like Alexandria was the melting pot of the world. In the years since Alexander the Great shattered all the borders from Greece to Egypt and founded the city, it had become the major crossroad and the holder of vast knowledge in the Library of Alexandria. And between the 5th century BC and the 2nd century CE, while the Corpus Hermetica was being compiled, it had a companion book being compiled along with it. Corpus was the cosmology. The companion manuscript, the Greek magical Papyri, contained the rituals. So this was a compilation of all the known rituals and techniques for inducing altered states, utilizing psychoactive plants combined with like chanting and incantations to interact, or in some cases speak with, the entities in the smoke. This is a collection of all the occult studies of the Bronze Age, with the foundations dating all the way back to ancient Sumer. And some of this stuff was like some of the first things ever written down back in Babylon, in Sumeria, or Sumer. Like the Corpus Hermetica, the papyrus was a syncretic mix of traditions. It had spells in there that call on the Egyptian god Thoth, and uses Greek vows to vibrate the ether, and commands the entity using the Jewish names of angels and Yahweh. The Greek magical papyri are essentially the open source compilation of every ancient magical tradition in the Mediterranean and the Near East. The spells were recorded in the Hellenistic period, but the underlying mechanics of summoning, binding, and using sympathetic magic to control the ether date all the way back to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia and the temples of the Nile. So when Christianity purged anything non-Christian from Europe and the Corpus Hermetica found refuge in the Arab world, the Greek magical papyri was not so lucky. The only remaining copy was sealed in a jar and buried deep in the sands of Egypt, away from the Romans, where it faded from the collective memory. Fast forward quite a while. In 1270 CE, a British Franciscan friar named Roger Bacon got a hold of a copy of a book called Secretum Secretorum, or The Secret of Secrets. It claimed to be a series of private letters from Aristotle to Alexander the Great, giving him advice on how to rule, how to stay healthy, use alchemy, use astrology to win wars, and the use of specific herbs to alter the human spirit. He believed it to be written by Aristotle and originally given to him by angels. It was actually a 10th century Arabic compilation, but he was convinced that the ancients had a unified science that allowed them to do miracles, and he dedicated his life to rediscovering it. Now, friars such as Bacon were supposed to have a life dedicated to poverty and preaching, but he had time to pursue other interests thanks to his secret patron, Pope Clement IV. The Pope was interested in seeing whether these magical tools from the Islamic world could be used to defend Christendom from the Mongols. And he gave Roger a mandate to write down everything he learned, plus his own ideas, which resulted in a book called Opus Magus. Essentially, it argued that the church should study alchemy, astrology, and optics as divine sciences. Bacon actively applied Islamic astrology, astrological mathematics to Christian eschatology. And by studying the theory of great conjunctions developed by Islamic astronomers, Bacon calculated the precise astrological lifespans of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And he utilized planetary cycles to mathematically predict the exact arrival of the Antichrist and the end of the current religious epoch. In doing this, he established the precedent that the apocalypse was a predictable astronomical equation rather than a divine mystery. Alarmingly, though, for Roger, his equation revealed the Antichrist was coming in 1315, only 28 years from when he calculated it. But because he was using Islamic Hermetic texts to write about wild ideas like gunpowder, magnifying glasses, and mechanical flight, his fellow friars became terrified of him, and they started claiming he was practicing black magic. He was eventually imprisoned for suspected novelties, and he died in prison in 1295, missing the end of the world by about 20 years.
Okay.
Obviously, his prediction didn't come true. But if you narrow the scope from the whole world to only the Knights Templar, he kind of was bang on, because their world came to an abrupt end in 1312. And this left a banking vacuum in Europe. And that vacuum, that space, was filled by a man named Cosimo de' Medici.
With bankers, gold, and architects' design, old Cosimo made the city walls divine.
The Medici Bank basically filled the void of the Templars Europe-wide, using the same system pioneered by the Templars. Cosimo was also the de facto ruler of Florence. But more importantly, in 1439, he hosted the Council of Florence, bringing together the Western Church and the Eastern Byzantine Church. Along with the priests came Greek scholars fleeing the Ottoman Empire, bringing with them the works of Plato. Medici found a scholar, gave him a villa and a salary, and set him to work translating the texts. Over time, more scholars arrived with more texts, specifically the writing of Hermes Trismegistus, and Medici, believing them to be older than even Plato, demanded that his scholar stop translating Plato and get to work on Hermes right away. These translations created Neoplatonism. Or I guess the Neoplatonism revival, maybe, in Europe, I don't know.
Like, yeah, a revival of Plato's.
Yeah, or I guess, yeah, that would be Platonism, this would be Neoplatonism.
Sure. That's kind of what the Medicis did, right? Like, they were just rich people who paid scholars and artists to.
Well, this was the start of that. Yeah,
Yeah,
but that was their thing. Yeah,
good for them.
Yeah, but these texts wasn't enough for Cosimo, so he hired and sent agents across the Mediterranean to buy every Greek or Arabic manuscript they could find. And all of a sudden, these forbidden or lost philosophical and proto-scientific ideas were available to the Western European elites for the first time.
Hello.
And this injection of culture and ideas was the spark for the Renaissance in Europe.
The rebirth.
Yeah, the rebirth. And the Medici Bank derived its financial supremacy from a single, highly lucrative client. They were the primary financiers of the Vatican. They managed the papal accounts, they collected the tithes from across Europe, and moved the wealth of the Catholic Church through their international branches. Now, in the early 15th century, Rome itself, the city, was a ruined, lawless city dominated by ancient, warring, aristocratic families. And the most powerful of these Roman aristocratic families was the Orsini. While Cosimo was building libraries in Florence, the Orsini were the feudal warlords of the Papal States. They didn't care about Neoplatonism or the translation of Hermes Trismegistus. They cared about territory, about building a military, and full control over the papacy. The Orsini family possessed massive, heavily fortified castles ringing the city of Rome, with the main one being the fortress at Bracciano. They effectively controlled the roads, the trade routes, and the supply lines in and out of Rome. No merchant, diplomat, or banker could move wealth in or out of the Vatican without navigating Orsini territory. More importantly, the Orsini were the commanders of the condottieri. They were the massive private mercenary armies that fought the constant territorial wars of the Italian city-states. If a pope wanted to reclaim rebellious territories in the Papal States, he didn't have a standing army to rely on. He had to hire the Orsini. So this setup created a symbiosis between the intellectuals in Florence and the warlords in Rome. The Pope required an army to maintain his power. The Orsini possessed the army, but required massive amounts of gold to mobilize it. The Pope didn't possess the immediate liquid capital to pay them. Therefore, the Pope borrowed the gold from the Medici Bank. Cosimo provided the credit, the Vatican authorised the war, and the Orsini executed the slaughter.
Oof.
The Orsini used this leverage to infiltrate the highest administrative levels of the Catholic Church. They ensured their brothers, sons, and nephews were constantly appointed as cardinals. They operated as a permanent shadow cabinet within the Vatican. Popes would die and be replaced, but the Orsini cardinal faction always remains, dictating papal policy and ensuring that the wealth of the Church continuously flows back into their own private estates. Now, while they were absolutely stinking rich, the Medici were still technically commoners, with a merchant background rather than a noble one. So throughout his life, Cosimo forged a strategic alliance with the Orsini. This paid off shortly after Cosimo's death in 1469, when his grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent, officially married Clarice Orsini, fusing the two disparate pillars of the Renaissance elite into the one house.
Lorenzo the Magnificent.
What a name. Orsini granted the Medici aristocratic legitimacy and the Vatican protection they required to survive, and in return, the Orsini gained direct access to the most sophisticated financial and diplomatic machinery in the world.
It's funny how we say sophisticated financial machinery. This is all before electricity, before tap and go pay, before any digital currencies or anything.
Yeah, this just means like they had like pigeons, the good pigeons.
Yeah. Really good
pigeons
smoke,
and gold.
Smoke signals. And just quickly, just going back, sorry, you mentioned the church like collecting tithes and stuff. Is that where the church's money came from? Was just tithes basically, or do they have?
Yeah,
they probably had some real estate holdings as well, perhaps, or no? It's mostly just people.
I don't think so.
Donating to the service.
The territory of the Vatican, but like the noble families of Rome owned everything else around them. They didn't sort of have any land that was theirs. They just had their parishes and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking of it as like 50 cents here and there, but it's actually people.
That's 10% of your income or whatever.
Exactly, and you do that for the whole population, and that's how the Vatican makes its money.
Yep.
Another thing that they got from they probably weren't the only ones, but that's a big part of the Old Testament.
That's the temple was.
Yeah,
a money exchange fucking building, wasn't it?
What was that tribe? What was the Levites, right? But yeah, they were the ones who ran the temple, and they didn't have to work. They didn't have to farm or do anything.
Yeah.
They were like, no, we're just going to stay at the temple, and you all have to give us your grain and your animal, your livestock, and all that sort of stuff.
Leave it on the shrine. I'll just be burning some incense inside.
We'll sacrifice it for you. We'll sacrifice it for you. That's what God said. It says here. That's what God said. God said, Levi's, stay here, and we take all your stuff.
So this integration of the capital funding the explosion of ancient knowledge with the Vatican's killing factory during the Vatican Inquisition could have ended very quickly. But the scholar that Medici hired to translate the text, Marsilio Ficino, came up with the concept of the Prisca Theologia, or the ancient theology.
Sounds like a nice cocktail.
It does. Ficino argued that God had imparted a single unified divine science to humanity at the dawn of creation, and he claimed that this original truth had been passed down through a strict lineage of masters, from Zoroaster to Hermes Trismegistus to Plato, and finally fracturing into the modern religions.
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah, I know. So he successfully framed the study of Egyptian magic, astrology, and Greek philosophy as the recovery of the original uncorrupted source of all religion. And this provided a loophole. The European elite could now practice the occult sciences by claiming they were studying the ancient foundations of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Ficino established the Platonic Academy at his villa in Careggi. It was an exclusive aristocratic syndicate where the most powerful men in Italy gathered to study Neoplatonism, astrology, and ceremonial magic. It became the mandatory educational curriculum for the most recognizable names of the Renaissance.
So do you think they noticed any magic? Or, like, these are smart people. If they're reading these texts and they're doing these things, do you think, like, wouldn't they notice that magic didn't work? Or
They're tripping balls while they're doing it.
Oh, okay. I forgot about that bit.
Yeah. And, like, chanting and shit.
And it feels good. They're in a little club and...
I mean, it's fun. I mean, it's different. But this Platonic Academy became the mandatory educational curriculum for the most recognizable names of the Is it Renaissance or Renaissance? I read it as Renaissance, but I was probably wrong. So the artistic masters of this era were directly patronized by the Medici family and educated within Ficino's Neoplatonic circle. They viewed this as the physical application of ancient divine geometry. Sandro Botticelli was deeply embedded in this network. His famous paintings, the Primavera and the Birth of Venus, were painted according to the Neoplatonic theories developed by Ficino, where certain images, proportions, and colours could act as physical talismans to draw down specific planetary energies.
I think I've had some of his work on my walls at one point or another.
Did they draw down any specific planetary energies that you notice?
Well, they look nice. Does that count?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm guessing that's what that is. Botticelli deliberately designed these paintings to capture the astrological influence of Venus, the planet he associated with love, harmony, and the mitigation of destructive forces.
That's where chicks are from, right?
Yeah, apparently. This Neoplatonic doctrine fundamentally dictated that man was a microcosm of the universe and that the human mind could comprehend the mind of God through the mastery of mathematics, proportion, and the natural sciences. And this was the philosophical justification that drove Leonardo da Vinci. His obsessive studies of human anatomy and geometry, culminating in works like the Vitruvian Man, were direct attempts to map the perfect divine proportions of the macrocosm onto the physical human body. As above, so below. Michelangelo was also absorbed into this network. As a teenager, he lived inside the Medici palace under the patronage of Lorenzo the Magnificent, Cosimo's grandson. Michelangelo was educated daily by the leading Neoplatonists of the Academy. He absorbed the belief that the physical form was a dense, heavy prison for the immortal soul, and the artist's duty was to strip away the excess marble to liberate the perfect divine form trapped within.
I like that.
In 1486, a young nobleman named Giovanni Pico della Mirandola entered this Florentine circle and expanded the system. Pico took the Neoplatonism of Ficino and fused it with Jewish Kabbalah, creating the foundation for Christian Kabbalah. Pico published his oration on the dignity of man, widely considered the manifesto of the Renaissance. He argued that unlike angels or animals, which are locked into a fixed state of being, humanity has no fixed place. Through the pursuit of philosophy and the esoteric sciences, a man could choose to descend to the level of beasts or ascend to the level of the divine, effectively becoming a co-creator with God.
Surely that'd be the other way around. Surely man is the one who's locked into this plane and angels are the ones who can move around. But
I don't know what he thought angels were.
Also, I think we skipped over it, but Michelangelo, or I can't remember if it was Michelangelo or Da Vinci, but with the painting of the God touching Adam and the brain, he snuck the diagram of the brain in there.
Yeah, I didn't include that. I mean, I could have gone way deeper on this.
Yeah, exactly.
On this Renaissance, it's the whole thing in itself. But you know,
it's a cool period, man. It's like
it is. Yeah,
and this makes a lot of sense. Like, yeah, they're obviously drawing on these old texts.
It's funny because a lot of the stuff that I listened to a lot of lectures on this period when I was putting this together. And not a lot of the stuff, but some of the stuff I was listening to, they didn't credit any of this stuff at all. But no, I've drilled down on it, and yeah, this is the absolute core of it.
Hell yeah.
Sorry. In 1492, while the church was publicly condemning Hermeticism, Rodrigo Borgia assumed the papacy as Pope Alexander VI, and Borgia commissioned the artist Pinturicchio to decorate his private living quarters, the Borgia apartments. He had the walls of the Vatican covered in frescoes depicting Isis, Osiris, and Hermes Trismegistus. The head of the Catholic Church then published a genealogical claim tracing the Borgia lineage directly back to the ancient Egypt Apis bull. Suddenly, Pope, the absolute monarch of Christianity, had gone Hermetic. And at the same time, the Jewish diaspora were creating some magic of their own. Kabbalah, meaning receiving, existed as an oral tradition before it was documented in 13th century Spain. The Zohar, or the Book of Splendor, appeared during this period. It operated as a linguistic and mathematical framework based on the Hebrew alphabet as the foundational building blocks of the universe. Essentially, the doctrine taught that the material world resulted from an information chain, and that by manipulating specific letters and numbers at the source, an operator could alter physical reality. And in 1492, the Spanish crown issued the Edict of Expulsion, forcing the Jewish population out of the country. This resulted in the migration of scholars who held this specific linguistic and mathematical knowledge, and they moved into Italy and Northern Europe, where their work was integrated by members of the existing aristocratic and intellectual networks. And that's where you get Giovanni Pico della Mirandola coming into contact with it and creating Christian Kabbalah. And so in 1486, he published his thesis. And he offered to pay travel expenses for any scholar in Europe to come to Rome and debate his premise that magic and Kabbalah were the most effective ways to prove the divinity of Christ. Pope Innocent VIII reviewed the text, declared portions of it heretical, and shut the debate down. Pico died suddenly in a tragic arsenic drinking accident in 1494. Regardless, this unified system functioned as a technology for factions of the aristocracy and its intelligence apparatus. This same year, a Catholic clergyman named Heinrich Kramer published the Malleus Maleficarum, which translates to the Hammer of Witches. So while these aristocrats in the Vatican were actively importing Hermetic texts and financing alchemical laboratories, they didn't want the peasants getting any wild ideas. Working class women in rural villages using psychoactive plants or tracking the lunar cycle for agricultural cycles were practicing unsanctioned, decentralized magic. The rural population relied on native European nightshades like datura, belladonna, henbane, and mandrake. These plants contained tropane alkaloids, which induced severe, indistinguishable from reality delirium. I can't stress how utterly terrifying datura seems. I can't believe that these guys were doing this on a regular basis. Like, it's like a kind of thing that like people don't come back from. You know, all those boogeyman stories about like acid and stuff like that. Like one tablet send you crazy, and you have a bad trip, whatever. That's datura, basically.
Uh-huh.
And because swallowing these plants is highly toxic, these practitioners had to absorb the chemicals through mucous membranes.
What does that mean?
So they mixed the plants with animal fat to create ointments.
Uh-huh.
And they used the shaft of a broomstick to rub it on as an applicator.
I don't know where this is going.
I'll leave it there. But
They're shelving this shit.
well, they're riding the broomstick.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Not so much. Not
going up.
Not
Okay.
vertically, horizontally,
Okay, all right.
rubbing it
Alright,
on
well-
the mucous membranes.
Fucking whatever. Jesus.
The state classified this practice as a satanic threat. Not a completely unreasonable classification for 1486, let's be honest.
Smearing hallucinogens on your taint, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, the reaction was a bit extreme, though. The practitioners were tortured and burned alive. So if you were a highly educated man in a castle running complex ceremonial rituals to speak to non-human entities, you were a philosopher. If you're a woman tripping balls, riding a broomstick around a fire, talking to nobody in a language that doesn't exist, you were a crazy person. High magic, later rebranded as natural philosophy, statecraft, and eventually science, was reserved exclusively for the men running the empires. Low magic had to be eradicated. In 1499, the philosophy was expanded again. A Benedictine abbot named Johannes Trithemius wrote a book called Steganographia. Read literally, it's a black magic grimoire detailing instructions on how to summon specific angels and spirits to transmit messages across vast distances. In reality, it was a highly advanced manual on cryptography and steganography. The names of the angels and the incantations were complex mathematical ciphers designed to hide intelligence data. More importantly, Trithemius was mapping the mechanics of time, and in 1508 he published De Septern Secundius, or On the Seven Secondary Intelligences. He took the 2,160-year cycle of the astrological age and divided it by 7. So Trithemius calculated that the world was governed sequentially by 7 planetary archangels. According to his maths, each archangel takes a turn ruling the earth for exactly 354 years and 4 months. One full rotation of these 7 angels equals 2,480.3 years. Given the limitations of 16th century astronomical tools, this was their functional mathematical model for a single precessional age. Trithemius determined that the world would enter its penultimate phase in the year 1525 under the rule of Archangel Gabriel, representing the moon. He defined this upcoming era as a time of maritime expansion, global exploration, and the shifting of power across the oceans. He wrote that Gabriel's rule would end and the 7th and final age of the cycle would begin in 1879. This final epoch, governed by Michael, Archangel Michael, and the Sun, was prophesied to be an era of global unification, the destruction of the old monarchies and the birth of a singular universal religion.
When was he writing this?
1500.
So that's just after the age of exploration has really opened up the world, right? Like
That's why he's like, we're entering an age of global exploration.
Wow, shocker. So they got they got around the bottom of Africa. Well, they got to India in 1490 something, perhaps. And obviously Columbus sailed the Atlantic in 1492.
Yeah, and this is 1499.
So after they would have got back, and the world's opened up. I mean, to be fair, it's a pretty significant little moment in history.
Yeah. A decade later, around 1510, one of Trithemius's students, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, compiled this scattered data into a single framework, and he drafted the 3 books of occult philosophy. Agrippa took the Hermeticism of the Medicis, the Kabbalah of Pico, and the cryptographic systems of his teacher, and categorized them into natural, celestial, and ceremonial magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his name sounds familiar, Agrippa.
This became the baseline from which the political witchcraft of the following centuries would flow. Over the Channel, during this time of change, and still long before they had an empire, the British were beginning to understand that in order to get one, you needed a monopoly on culture. They had the mythology of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and this has always played a large part in the culture of Britain. But unfortunately for them, the Catholic Church had always had a pretty tight grip on everything else. That is, until King Henry VIII. In 1534, he passed the Act of Supremacy, officially breaking from Rome and establishing the Church of England. The reason for this is commonly known as being to legalise divorce so he didn't have to keep killing his wives. And it was. But strategically, it was a hostile takeover. A true sovereign nation can't outsource its culture to a foreign pope. And so by dissolving the Catholic monasteries across the country, he seized a staggering amount of land and wealth, transferring it to a newly forged, fiercely loyal aristocracy, permanently centralising spiritual and temporal power under the crown. I've been to the castle of one of Henry VIII's wives.
Yeah.
In Berlin.
Any good?
They were small back then.
The people.
Like the roofs are really low and the hallways are like really tight.
Yeah.
Like the little fucking stairwells, you're like really got to almost sideways up them at some point.
Well, if you got to put every block there individually.
Yeah, you can't go creating vast, spacious stairwells. In the British Isles, with the Roman Catholics gone and a freshly enriched elite class, England was free to start creating its own culture. When Henry VIII died, the crown passed to his Catholic daughter, Mary. Queen Mary systematically burned Protestants and threw her own Protestant half-sister, Elizabeth, into the Tower of London under suspicion of treason. Mary, quite contrary. During this purge, Queen Mary's secret police arrested a young mathematician and astronomer named John Dee.
Seek the truth the aether hides.
His charge was treason by astrology. Dee had been secretly casting the horoscopes of both the Queen and the imprisoned Princess Elizabeth. He had calculated that Mary was destined to die childless and that Elizabeth was designated by the celestial clock to take the throne. Dee was thrown into a cell. But in 1558, his astrological math proved correct. Mary died and Elizabeth took the throne. Because Dee had literally gone to prison for prophesizing her ascension, Elizabeth trusted him implicitly. She immediately summoned him, ordered him to use his celestial charts to calculate the exact, most astrologically auspicious date and time for her coronation.
Reagan would do the same thing a few centuries later.
I mean, Hitler did a similar thing too. It's a theme. To project her centralized Protestant power outward and rival the Spanish and French, Elizabeth relied entirely on the man who had predicted her survival. Dee amassed the largest private library in England at his home in Mortlake. The shelves were packed with the Hermetic and Neoplatonic texts that Cosimo de' Medici had funded the translation of a century earlier. Dee utilised his mastery of mathematics and Hermetic geometry to chart advanced navigational routes for English explorers. He's the man who literally coined the phrase, the British Empire. Simultaneously, Dee operated across Europe as an informant for Elizabeth's primary spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham. He used his status as a scholar and astrologer to move freely throughout foreign royal courts, gathering state secrets. And he signed his encrypted, eyes-only dispatches to the Queen with 2 circles and a 7. John Dee is 007.
Yeah, right.
In 1564, Dee published the Monas Hieroglyphica, detailing a single unifying esoteric symbol designed to represent the entirety of the Hermetic cosmos. This entire cosmos was built on the core Hermetic doctrine, as above, so below. To Dee and the Elizabethan intelligence network, this functioned as a literal geographic map. They operated on the strict esoteric doctrine that the macrocosm of the stars was perfectly mirrored by the microcosm of the Earth. Specific constellations corresponded directly to specific land masses. A cosmic anomaly in the sky was interpreted as a direct geopolitical mandate on the ground. And in November 1572, the network received their mandate. I think we'll watch a video for this.
And then to bring it on a bit into the time when that society wanted to call itself the Society of the Golden and Rosy Cross, come into Elizabethan times, time of Queen Elizabeth I. And they're the key players in this, as far as I can see. There may be others, or there were others, but I think the real top key ones we know are Sir Nicholas Bacon, John Dee, Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, Sir Henry Lee, and Sir Philip Sidney, who decided, for some reason, right, we're going to use this symbol and we're going to start a particular type of work. And then, as if to confirm their ideas, straight away in 1572, a supernova, a huge supernova, appeared in Cassiopeia, constellation of Cassiopeia. It caused a huge stir right across Europe, and it shone brighter than Venus for 3 years, from 1572 to 1575. Theodore Beza on the continent described it as the second coming of Christ. Tycho Brahe described it as the seventh revolution that would inaugurate the Golden Age. I mean, that's what they were all working for, because it had been prophesied for millennia that this is going to happen at this moment in time, which is the end of a great age, 26,000 years, 12 ages make it up. Fantastic time. Jesus prophesied it. He talked about it to his disciples and asked them to prepare Europe particularly for this moment. So one of the key things about their work, which mostly been missed all these hundreds of years by people who've researched these things, which I want, it means a lot to me. And even before I even knew about the whole Rosicrucian history, it really was important to me as an architect how the landscape affects us, affects our consciousness, affects our behavior and so on. So we have to learn to do the right thing in the right place at the right time with the right orientation or purpose. And that's the key initiatory thing the Rosicrucians were imbued with, and that's what they were trying to fulfill. And join heaven and earth together and earth to heaven. Well, we project onto the stars a pattern that we call constellations and zodiac and so on like that. Now, the other key thing in this, Cassiopeia, when you put the two globes together, Cassiopeia appears over Britain. Now, she's the heavenly queen, the heavenly mother of the child of light. The child of light in the mystery traditions, including the Christian tradition, is known as Dionysus, which means son of God. And the Greeks also called that Christ, Christos, Christ. For the heavenly queen to give birth to a heavenly son of light, we're talking about that ascended person, that ascended soul. And the symbol of that ascended soul is Cygnus, the swan. And I've seen myself, there are pictures and carvings of Jesus being that northern cross, but with swan's feathers all over. So he is Cygnus, the swan. You know, he was recognized as that by Europeans of the time. Well, guess where Cygnus appears when it's projected onto the Earth? The east coast of North America. That was designated from then on by the English as the land of Virginia, the land of the Virgin, where her child of light is supposed to be manifested. Whew. So then, from that came on, and John Dee was intimately involved in this, came all this navigation. We have to get to North America. Forget about the rest of America. We have to get to North America, to that coast, and establish Virginia there to set in motion the birth of this future explosion of light, this child of light that will appear there. So that was in their minds. Unfortunately, we know a lot of it went very wrong. But a lot of good was also anchored there at the same time. I thought you'd like to know that, because it's really key to a lot of things that were done and what was hoped for by this Rosicrucian fraternity and what they're still hoping for. You know, and sometimes when you get psychological breakthroughs and something better, there is a breakdown, isn't there? Breakdown to break through, they often say in psychology. Breakdown to break through. And it often brings up the worst first. You think, oh God, that's awful. And then you change into a better way of thinking. Better improvement, which personally I think is going on politically right now, both in this country and in the USA and hopefully elsewhere. But particularly this country in the USA. And the very centre of politics in the USA is in what was called Virginia, the land of Virginia. You know, it's sort of... So I'm very hopeful, you know, thinking from the Rosicrucian level. But it's a knife edge. Knife edge.
Is the common story that it was after the Queen being a virgin, or is that a different territory? I think it's a different territory I'm thinking of.
I think it's, well, yeah, but it's like,
maybe I'm thinking of the Virgin
she
Islands.
was the Virgin Queen, and she was the Virgin Queen, so that was how they were like, oh,
right.
you're the Virgin
Yeah,
Queen,
okay.
this is the but it was based on this mapping of this supernova as to this is where the metaphorical Christ of this seventh age is going to be born. So we need to make that happen.
Okay.
And so this became the focus for Dee's crew, who he's referring to them as Rosicrucians. Rosicrucians weren't a thing yet, but this is like the proto-Rosicrucian group. Aside from encouraging the Queen to create an empire, he was interested in using ritual magic to contact and extract information from entities, which he presumed to be angels. But Dee couldn't see these entities himself, no matter how hard he tried. So he needed to find somebody that could. So he partnered with a scryer named Edward Kelley. Kelley was a convicted forger who'd had his ears cropped in the pillory for counterfeiting coins. His background as an apothecary provided him with an expert knowledge of botanicals and chemical compounds. Kelley would stare into an obsidian mirror or a crystal ball and dictate what the entities were saying, while Dee transcribed the sessions. These sessions were conducted in small, unventilated rooms filled with dense alchemical incense. During their travels in Europe, Kelley claimed to have discovered a red powder in Glastonbury, a substance they utilised in alchemical experiments aimed at transmutation and the extension of life. But in practical terms, they spent years running exhaustive, clinically documented rituals. They extracted a fully functional language that he called Enochian, which the entities claimed were the original language of creation. But the entities issued geopolitical directives. They informed Dee that the world was entering an apocalyptic end age and commanded him to petition the royal courts of Europe to abandon their corrupt religious dogmas and establish a unified divine world order. During the 1580s, Dee travelled extensively through Central Europe, initially setting up in Prague at the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, but the Vatican was monitoring him, and the papal nuncio pressured the emperor to expel them for necromancy. They became burned intelligence assets operating deep within hostile Catholic territory, but they were granted sanctuary and unlimited financial backing by Wilhelm von Rosenberg, or William of Rosenberg, the wealthiest and most powerful nobleman in Bohemia. Dee and Kelley moved their operations to his fortified estate. This is especially interesting because the Rosenbergs maintained a formal genealogical pact with the Orsini family of Rome.
What's that mean? To have babies and stuff?
Well, what it means is that they're actually the Orsini Rosenberg family. They're not actually related, but when the Rosenbergs came to prominence, they needed to tie their name to an aristocratic family, and they reached out to the Orsinis, and the Orsinis said sure.
So they had babies, or it's just a name?
I don't think so. I don't think they had babies. I think they just had a pact with them that they were the one family.
Bizarre.
Yeah, so the Roman oligarchs and the Bohemian nobles were operated as a single transnational bloodline. And this is during the 30 Years' War or whatever, the Protestant Catholic War. And this is also there's also a war going on against the Ottomans and the Vatican and the Holy Roman Empire as well. So it's made even more curious. So it's these Vatican noble families, like the Orsini, they made up the bulk of the sovereign military order of Malta, which at the time required members to be of a provable, unbroken, centuries-old aristocratic Catholic lineage. And the Orsini family itself was in command of the order. So we got the Catholics fighting Protestants, the Knights of Malta fighting the Ottomans on behalf of the Catholics, and meanwhile, at the same time, the peak of their nobility was funding and housing these Protestant, heretic British spies working directly for Queen Elizabeth to develop a system of magic to speak to angels. and this is I think this is speculation on my part because I couldn't find anything about it, but I think it's fair to speculate that this alliance left a permanent historical footprint. The name of the Rosenberg translates from German to Rose Mountain, and the official crest of the Rosenberg and Orsini families was a prominent 5-petaled red rose. The rose and the cross, Rosy Cross, Rosicrucian.
Rosicrucianism.
John Dee was working within a tight circle of Elizabethan power brokers. And one of the central figures in this proto-Rosicrucian network alongside Dee was Sir Nicholas Bacon, the Lord Keeper of the Great Seal. Nicholas was the chief of the Queen's legal and political apparatus, and in 1561 he had a son named Francis.
Aha.
Francis was born into the heart of the English intelligence nexus. He entered Cambridge at the age of 12. By 15, he was sent to France, embedded with the English ambassador. He went there to learn statecraft, diplomacy, and cryptography. He returned to London in 1579 and he set up at Gray's Inn to master the law and entered Parliament shortly after.
Set up what? Where?
To master the law, he studied law. Throughout the 1580s and 1590s, Bacon operated as a high-level intelligence and political advisor to the Earl of Essex. And to manage this flow of information, Bacon essentially ran a private intelligence agency and a scriptorium, which is basically like he had, I think, hundreds of scribes, researchers, and writers that he basically just housed at his estate in Twickenham. He spent his days systematically categorizing human knowledge, drafting elaborate political pageants for the royal court, and writing treatises on the mechanics of empire and the manipulation of the masses.
He's a big one, Bacon, right?
He is a big one.
Big one.
So while Francis Bacon was running his scriptorium, building the philosophical pillar and the state's intelligence pillar, the cultural pillar of the empire was being erected across town. In 1564, a few years after Bacon, William Shakespeare was born in the provincial town of Stratford-upon-Avon to a local glove maker. There are no surviving records of his education. Following a 7-year gap in the historical record, he materialised in the London theatre scene around 1592. During the 1590s, the Shakespearean plays began to saturate London. The works fundamentally standardised the English language. They also demonstrated an unprecedented, exhaustive vocabulary and a flawless, granular command of international law, aristocratic court politics, military cryptography, and royal pastimes like falconry. The kind of themes that you would think require an intimate insider's understanding of the highest echelons of the European statecraft, yet here we are.
Yeah, there's history in there, philosophy, and I mean, like the Julius Caesar ones and etc. Antigone, or whatever his name is, Mark Antony.
The English public was being fed a highly sophisticated cultural framework delivered by a working-class provincial glover's son, operating in the same city. At the same time, the Lord Keeper's son was churning out the empire's political and philosophical foundations. By the end of the century, the dual pillars of British culture and British statecraft had been permanently set in stone. William Shakespeare acted as their Homer, standardising the English language and embedding a unified cultural mythology into the public consciousness. Sir Francis Bacon acted as their Plato.
Okay. I think I see what you're subtly implying.
I will also
here.
point out that what these scholars were doing in this scriptorium is standardising the English language, which was then spread through Shakespeare. And then we read this last time. Then in 1598, right at the end of the 1590s, a Scottish official named William Shaw issued the Shaw Statutes, and this officially reorganised the stonemasons' guilds in Scotland, dictating how lodges should operate. Following these statutes, the Master Masons of Scotland drafted and signed the Charters of St Clair in 1600 and 1628. These legal documents officially recognised the Sinclair family, who built Rosslyn Chapel, as the hereditary Grand Masters and patrons of the Masons in Scotland. When King James VI of Scotland took the English throne as James I, the Baconian scientific state in London and the Scottish Masonic Lodge structure were united under a single monarch. This specific point in time marks the beginning of the transition from actual stonemasons, like men who physically cut rocks and built things, to speculative Freemasons. and the elite class began infiltrating the stonemasons guilds, utilizing the existing highly secure guild structure to build social and political networks rather than cathedrals.
When you say more speculative Freemasons, you mean like more of an architect kind of thing as opposed to a stonemason?
No, they were just Rosicrucians.
Yeah, but what do you mean when you say more speculative Freemasons?
It's called speculative Freemasonry. It's basically I think that the speculative bit is like speculative theology.
Okay. I just thought when you're contrasting it with the physical stonemasons.
Well, because they were the stonemason guilds.
And then they
essentially it was like the CFMEU, you know, like.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I thought I've always imagined them to be just like architects, basically. Like they just know how to design a certain arch, you know, like they have the drawings as opposed to physically chipping the stone.
The link is the geometry of stonemasons, like the geometry that the stonemasons, that knowledge that they had that they used to build like the cathedrals and stuff, marries up with this Hermetic. That's the link.
Yeah.
But this is where they stopped being stonemasons and worrying about building things, and it was used as a club for, you know, like what's the word I'm looking for? Noblemen who wanted to speculate on this, you know, new crazy shit that's coming out of Europe.
It's one I've had on my list for a while. The whole Freemasons thing. I've been intimidated.
Well, I've got it right here.
Here we go.
So
all right, let's get
you're going to be getting the entire story.
Get around.
Don't worry about that. So by the time the year 1600 rolled around, the British establishment possessed the wealth of the monasteries, the maritime power of the British Navy, the philosophical bedrock of the Rosicrucians, and the secure lodges of the Freemasons. Over the next few decades, they would enlighten their culture, and they would have the cash to do it properly.
Thanks to a bit of piracy?
Yeah, bit of piracy to start off. Well,
what's his name? Francis Drake went and robbed some Spanish ships.
In February of 1600, in Rome, on the Italian peninsula, Giordano Bruno, a monk preaching Hermeticism, infinite universes, and Egyptian magic, he was chained to a pole in Rome, gagged and burned alive by the Vatican Inquisition.
Those bastards.
They made it clear that anyone engaging with the occult would meet a swift end. They couldn't get bogged down with dealing with the occultists. They had Protestants to kill.
God damn it.
Yeah, a few months later, in the winter of 1600 to 1601, Virginio Orsini, the Duke of Bracciano, and the height of the Vatican's nobility, travelled to Protestant London. Queen Elizabeth I threw him a massive state banquet. William Shakespeare wrote Twelfth Night specifically to flatter him, naming the romantic lead Duke Orsino. The men enforcing the Inquisition for the masses were simultaneously drinking wine with the core of the Protestant British Empire. Religious wars were for the peasants. The transnational aristocratic club operated above that. I bring this up not just to point out the hypocrisy, but to highlight that not only was this situation happening, but he arrived there in late December 1600 as a personal guest of the Queen, and he stayed till at least January 6, 1601, when the play was performed for him. So during his stay, on the last day of the year 1600, Queen Elizabeth signed the charter to officially create the British East India Company, the world's first corporate entity. And what an entity it was. And I will rarely be mentioning them from here on in, but they're a massive part of it. But we've got a whole other few hours on them that you can go back through the podcast feed and listen to.
Heard about them before.
Operating quietly within this power structure still was Sir Francis Bacon, or just Francis Bacon at that point. When King James I took the throne in 1603, Bacon was knighted and began a methodical ascent to the highest ranks of the English government. By 1606, he was serving as co-founder, legal counsel, and key investor for a new corporate entity, the Virginia Company. Sure, on the outside, Virginia was just a tobacco farm, but Bacon's worldview was heavily influenced by this proto-Rosicrucian ideology, and to this ever more compartmentalized section of the elite, the prophecy was moving forward as planned.
This is the American Virginia, I imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As Sir Bacon climbed the political ladder, becoming Attorney General in 1613, the Crown got to work tweaking their new Protestant theology. They published the King James Bible in 1611. Around the same time, between 1614 and 16, 3 manifestos were published in Germany, announcing the existence of a secret brotherhood of illuminated alchemists working from the shadows to guide the world into a new age. These were the Rosicrucian Manifestos. The title pages explicitly featured John Dee's Monas Hieroglyphica symbol. The esoteric network that Dee had seeded on the Rosenberg Orsini estates was surfacing. Taking a lead from Hermes Trismegistus, the moniker used for the author of these manifestos was Christian Rosenkreuz. So just as Bacon was consolidating legal power in London to build a scientific state, these manifestos publicly announced an invisible college of illuminated scientists operating behind the scenes.
Is that
By
that was their name, right? The Invisible College?
Eventually, not yet.
Okay.
By 1618, Sir Francis Bacon had reached the pinnacle of political power and he was appointed the Lord Chancellor of England. In that same year, the Continental Rosicrucian Network attempted to seize power and install a known Hermetic sympathiser, Frederick V, onto the throne of Bohemia. The objective was to turn Prague into the capital of an enlightened Hermetic empire, Europe. But the Christian Habsburgs responded with overwhelming political force, and they crushed them at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620. The surviving network was hunted down, forcing them to scatter and drive their philosophy entirely underground in Europe, into the Scottish stonemasons' guilds and on to the New World. Francis Bacon died in 1626. The following year, his private secretary published his unfinished novel, New Atlantis. This text outlines a fictional island society named Ben Salem. While the island technically has a king, the true governing authority is an autonomous, heavily funded scientific institution called Solomon's House. Its stated mandate is the manipulation of nature and the total acquisition of knowledge. In the text, Bacon detailed technologies centuries ahead of his time: submarines, flying machines, genetic modification of agriculture, and advanced acoustics capable of projecting voices and sounds across great distances. New Atlantis codifies the mechanics of a breakaway scientific elite. Bacon describes how the fathers of Solomon's House swear strict oaths of secrecy. They hold private internal councils to determine which technological breakthroughs are released to the public, which are given to the state, and which remain entirely classified. They deploy covert operatives called Merchants of Light to travel globally under assumed identities, extracting foreign scientific data and bringing it back to Ben Salem.
Merchants of Light. That's a great term. I don't think I've heard that before.
Yeah, I like it. While the text circulated in London, the ground of this new Atlantis was being stabilised across the Atlantic. By the 1620s, the Virginia Company had secured its foothold in North America. The corporate charter was revoked in 1624, transitioning Virginia into a royal colony. The esoteric designation of the territory remained intact, but the colony was structured around strict hierarchical control, relying on the aggressive extraction of cash crops and the formal introduction of chattel slavery. A localized elite, later known as the First Families of Virginia, was installed to manage the territory. They established an oligarchy where a factional ruling class commanded the labour, resources, and the reality of the masses. But it provided the necessary economic and social baseline for the new society. Back in England during this period, the academics and occultists of the esoteric network operated quietly under the moniker of the Invisible College, while King Charles I was busy burning the house down. His uncompromising obsession with the absolute divine right of kings drove the country straight into the English Civil War, which forced the esoteric elite to harden their network in the shadows while the public slaughtered each other over theology. Following the Civil War, Oliver Cromwell assumed power in England and swiftly executed Charles I. Cromwell was an apocalyptic religious fanatic. His spymaster, John Thurlow, built a sprawling, modernised intelligence and cryptography network. And then in 1656, Cromwell officially readmitted the Jewish financial and merchant networks into England after a 300-year ban. He didn't do this just for the money. He did it because his Puritan theology dictated that the Jews had to be scattered to the ends of the earth to then gather again from exile to trigger the second coming of Christ.
Oh, here we go.
It's literally how the Jews got into London. Because he made them come in so that he could send them back to Israel at some point.
Fuck's sake.
Unfortunately, for the Rosicrucians, a highly advanced scientific utopia cannot happen under a regime that bans public gatherings and executes citizens for witchcraft. Whilst Cromwell ruled, the Invisible College actively organised the subsequent regime change. The men behind this transition were the earliest documented speculative Freemasons in history. Alias Ashmole, a Rosicrucian and alchemist, maintained the underground scientific network in London, and simultaneously Sir Robert Morey, a Scottish spymaster and hermeticist, went into exile in France with the deposed king's son, Charles II. Morey operated as the young king's intelligence handler and back-channel diplomat. So in 1660, following Cromwell's death, the network successfully brokered the restoration of the monarchy. King Charles II was installed. He was heavily invested in the occult. Upon taking the throne, he ordered the construction of a private alchemy laboratory directly beneath his royal bedchamber at Whitehall Palace. And the Invisible College immediately cashed in their political capital. And in November 1660, months after the king's return, their group formally stepped out of the shadows. This underground Rosicrucian network was formally chartered as the Royal Society of London.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby. And that's where we'll leave it for
There we
today.
go. So what year is this?
This is 1662.
That far back, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's that's like this is the dawning of the proper scientific revolution, right? This is where we start
The
getting really
Enlightenment.
serious.
Yeah.
Going from the Renaissance. God, it's such a fascinating journey, isn't it? How you need to have the Renaissance to pave the way, you know, and all this stuff.
Well,
and
yeah,
then...
it's like the whole Enlightenment and the whole British colonization of the Americas. You know, it's a direct byproduct of Medici translating the Arabic text.
And then, look, say what you will about the British aristocracy, but around the 1600s, they did start kind of inventing science and taking... Sorry, I shouldn't say inventing, because, you know, you had the Arabs and all that, but, like, taking it seriously.
Formalizing it, they...
Yeah,
you know, and I
formalising
guess the difference between the English and the Arabs is, like, the Arabs... And it's not like they chose to do this. They had to fuse it with religion, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so it was a bit more secular, wasn't it?
Whereas, like, for Francis Bacon's whole thing is hard data. You know?
Empiricism.
It's like
Empiricism.
quantify. Only you got to be able to quantify everything in the physical, which is, you know, it doesn't. It's hard to sort of marry the two, where you're like he was a Rosicrucian, Bacon, and he was, you know, his dad was a fucking friend of John Dee, and in this sort of like proto Rosicrucian circle, which was a very small group of people, and that's where he's getting these scientific, you know, ideas and stuff from. But also at the same time, you know, the Enlightenment. Well, there are a lot of like occultists in there, especially essential figures of the Enlightenment. Still, like on paper, the Enlightenment is about nothing mystical. It's, you know, it's like separating.
It is. I mean, when you think about it, it is interesting how long it took for that to happen. You know what I mean? Like, it just, maybe it's just our modern bias, but it seems so natural to us to think, well, yeah, obviously you've got to be empirical and look at the data and separate it all from that.
I know. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
from our modern lens. But also, you would think that is just an inherently natural thing. And it's interesting to learn that it's not. Or maybe it was, and it was just suppressed because, you know...
Well, yeah. Well, there's that. I mean, you had to have... Was it Pico who labelled it as the Prisca Theologia, as the source, the original divine fucking source code that's flowed into all these religions. you had to have that step for it to be permissible
Yeah.
to the people with the money to start exploring things that aren't dictated by the Bible, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's sort of the whole point, really, isn't it?
Mm.
Still, I mean, you know what I mean. It should be a very natural thing, and it's
You'd think so. But that's, I mean,
remarkable that it's not. It's remarkable.
that
that
is
it
what
wasn't.
Plato was, like, doing, wasn't it? Like,
Yeah,
it
yeah, you're
is-
right. That's yeah. And then it was the fucking when the Abrahamics came along.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's the bloody
Yeah,
Abrahamics.
that is the problem. It's, it's that is literally the problem.
Yeah.
That's what's, because otherwise, you know, we'd be doing this podcast 1,000 years ago.
Exactly.
But there was there was not just like a delay, but there was like a full destruction and then rebuild, and then strict controls on the rebuild that had to be broken through.
And now it's the Abrahamics that are causing all this fucking mess at the moment as well.
Well, I think this is why they're obsessed with like this thing about the ages, because they're like, this is how we can wrest back control. Like, that's the saving grace, is like, well, you know, let the ages progress and whatever, but we got to make sure that like we can get ahead of this fucking last bit so we can start again like they did last time.
Yeah, it's very upsetting. Very upsetting.
It's like, it's not like this is like a constant, you know, a doctrine for like royals or whatever, but it's just like, it just has to be one guy in a generation. That's it. One guy in a generation that crosses path of the royal and gets in their ear about astrological signs. And then that royal, oh, okay. Well, it takes one royal to listen. And then there's a whole generation of focusing on that, you know? And then once that generation goes away, they've probably got a little network there, and that could maybe last a few more, and it might fizzle out. And then it just takes one other guy to just be like, hey, if we can track the stars, then like maybe we can get ahead of like this next fucking cycle that I've figured out or whatever, and then it all fucking starts again. You know?
So we need King Charles to listen to this, to listen to the podcast. Is that
Well,
what
it's
you're saying?
interesting because it's like, yeah, Charles I and Charles II were very pivotal.
Yeah.
Like Charles I, like if this, you know, there's two doctrines that sort of follow this throughout the you know, centuries, and that's like as above, so below, and also break down to break through. And if you look at like Charles I and Charles II, that's what, I mean, I'm sure not consciously by Charles, or Charles I anyway. He broke down the monarchy. Charles II broke through, and then now we've got Charles III.
Yeah, that might be where the monarchy ends.
Well, yeah, could be. He's at the White House at the moment.
Yeah. Poor guy.
It's like, oh, he's gonna sort out the relationship, the special relationship, but also he's not allowed to talk about politics.
Yeah,
So I don't
interesting.
know how he's gonna sort out the special relationship if he's not allowed to talk about any political matters.
Or is now the time when a strong monarch does need to talk politics to save the empire and bring the
allowed.
world back from... Oh, look, anyone can do anything. It doesn't matter what you're allowed
because,
to do. Rules don't
because
matter
of
anymore.
Charles I, and I think there was another one that came a bit later that was also obsessed with this like divine right of kings. But eventually, like the Invisible College, you know, takes out, like they shut down this whole divine right of kings, and they're like, not to skip ahead in the timeline, but like, you know, it was Edward VII that fucking stamped that shit right out.
The divine right.
Wow, the monarchies of fucking Europe.
What a fucking story, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you as always for breaking that all down. It's going to take another listen, I think. I'll have to...
Yeah, it's dense.
So much to process, yeah.
I mean, and this is the easy part of the timeline where I can sort of keep it linear. It's like it kind of, you know, it fractals as it goes along to the point where you
Yeah,
get to like the
right.
1800s, and it's just like there's so many
Million
fucking splinter groups of splinter groups of splinter
Yeah.
groups, and they're all competing. And
Yeah. Yeah, fuck. Well, all we can do is, you know, slug away at it.
of a political dirt unit.
Typical